Alright guys, so at the end of one of my recent videos you may have noticed a shot of these Maxi snowflake wheels. Now I did want some 5 stars, but I ended up with these snowflakes because they were cheap. And the reason they were cheap is because they were attached to this absolute wreck. Now this bike was on eBay, spares or repairs, and I thought that looks a bit of a brave repair. But, you know, there wasn't much detail about it, there weren't many pictures, so I just thought, you know, it's worth it for the wheels. I think I paid something stupid like 15 quid for it, which is a tenth of what the wheels are worth. So I thought, let's go for it. Any extra bits we can get off it that might be useful are a bonus. And this is basically the worst bike I've ever seen in my life, as far as I know. It's even worse than the Maxi I chopped in half a while ago, and I would have chopped this one in half, but I forgot I had it at the time. So, let's go over a few of its more interesting details. First of all, here's your wheels. These are the star of the show, I guess. They're seized, which I imagine I should be able to free them off, and they're all scaly and horrific. The story of this bike is that it's been sat in a garden uncovered, surrounded by weeds for 20 years or something, so it's had a very difficult life, bless it. As you can see by the condition of the tyres, you can actually peel away the layers to get to the cords underneath, which is amazing. You know, here's the front mudguard. Yep, that's pretty shot. The rear mudguard carrier, so the actual mudguard's missing, but this is the tail end of the frame because it's a Maxi S. We've also got a nice view of the front forks. I think they may need looking at when we get it back on the road, because I suspect that huge hideous bend in there is going to affect ride quality slightly. The rear suspension is not much better, as you can see. And so we move on to the engine mounting situation. Here is where the engine should mount to. No, it's just, there's nothing there. The engine mounts, part of them are still stuck to the engine where they've corroded through. The engine, incidentally, is held on entirely by the chain, and also a little bit by a tiny bit of bodywork that still attaches it to the swing arm. So it basically moves independent. As you can see, I tried to stand the bike up so I could sit on it, and this happened. Which is great. It used to be, when I first got it out from under its tarp, where it was having a much better life than it did before I got it, it also was attached on by the exhaust, but unfortunately the exhaust was so corroded that the exhaust bracket actually just tore straight out the side of the exhaust silencer. So the bad news is that this would be an MOT fail, so I'm going to have to get that looked at definitely. Here we have a nice view of the cylinder head, and the fact that it's been stored outside for 20 or 30 years without a spark plug in hasn't done it any favours, and it's stuffed with mud and muck and shit. Obviously it sees solid, unfortunately. Not a much better story for the tank either, I'm afraid. There's a view from the top with the rust. It's stored without a cap, in the rain, no good at all. I think that book rack's definitely seen better days, for sure. And here's the view you'd get if you were to ride the mighty thing. Just imagine powering down the highways on that thing. Now, luckily the wheels do look just about savable, although they are borderline, but for the price it was definitely worth a go. And I believe that this was a NK Nippy from the mid-80s. So actually, it's one of the latest models there were, really. Bearing in mind that it says on the nameplate that it was made in Austria. They did make them for a while afterwards in Italy, but this isn't an Italian one, it says it's an Austrian one, so that puts it at late 80s latest. They did them to about 1988, something like that. I wouldn't think this was much older than that. But it's got the kickstart engine, which is ruined, and all the rest of it's ruined too. I've had a bit of a go at removing the wheels. The front wheel came off with a bit of persuasion, and the rear wheel is stuck. Now, I can get it off attached to the swinging arm, I think, but this bolt here that holds the rear shockers on has come off. It's sheared off in my socket, so that's rubbish. Also, a quick look underneath. It's knackered around that side as well, look. And there's the mudguard. All in all, a very sad bike. Okay, so let's start with the good news, which isn't these tyres. Right, so I had to cut the swing arm off, both sides, to get the back wheel off, but it is off. And this here, even though it was a kickstart model, is a thread for a freewheel. So if I can clean the threads up enough to get a freewheel on it, then this can go on a pedal start moped, which is brilliant because I've only got one kickstart frame for with rear suspension, and really I don't want to put snowflakes on anything that's a hardtail because they're notorious for shattering as it is, so a bit of suspension in there can't hurt. Now I know you can convert a pedal start frame to kickstart by faffing about taking the pedals off and putting foot pegs on, but I'd rather not bother. So that is the last of the good news, I'm afraid. The bad news is this is stuck solid, this brake plate, and I had to go with a 3-jaw puller at getting it off, and yeah, it went sadly wrong, so I need another brake plate. The brake plate on the rear, if you hit it with a hammer, does move round, but there's nothing left of it. Look, this should be a plate here, and it's all rotted away. It's like I haven't got one here I can show you really, but it's like a round plate, and then this bit here, which is the bit that anchors it to the swing arm to stop the whole brake assembly spinning round, that is riveted on over the top, so that there is a double layer of metal, and the single layer is just rotted away basically. So that's not ideal. I have tried getting a puller in it either side, no good. As you can see, I've chopped the axle off. I've drilled a hole in the middle as good, you know, the best I could, in order to centre the puller, but it just wasn't having it. So the next step is chop this off here, being very careful not to damage these threads, and then try and tap it through that way, because it should hopefully tap the whole assembly off this way, as long as we remove all this hardware. I don't know if it'll work. I've been soaking it in penetrating oil, we'll have to see. And then we've got the joy of undoing these nuts, because this sprocket is not going to be reused either for obvious reasons. Wish me luck. These bearings are looking nice. I don't think we'll be reusing those either. See, the axle spins freely, so it's not really helping me. It's not going to push through until I've removed that bearing race thing. I forget what they're called now. So back to the drawing board. Shit, I thought these were sealed bearing. So the idea was to drill a hole down the centre of the axle and then tap a bolt or something into it and use that to hold the axle still while I wound the cone off. Didn't quite work like that because my drill bit got stuck and I didn't need to thread anything into it. Bargain. Looking nice. Let's empty all that shite out, shall we? Okay. Hopefully that should just tap out now then. Oh, how awesome is that? This punch fits right down the hole I just drilled. Ooh, that brake line needs a bit of love. One of the pads is stuck to it. Oh, yeah. It's not happy, is it? But we're out at least. Here's my amazing removing it with a drill technique. Actually, the bearing carrier thing. Doesn't even look that bad, but I suppose it's been in a tiny bit of grease, hasn't it, the entire time. Next job then will be to remove that pad from inside, but I'll save that for another day. Got another hood to remove. This is where you really need a 15mm slim spanner like that. It's only cheap. It means I can get in around the bearing thing, but I keep forgetting the name of. Still going to have to chop the end of the axle off though. Right, I'm going to leave that on there so there's a larger surface to hit with a hammer. And we'll try that. Ha! Now this is what I should have done in the first place. And I really wish I had. We're coming. Again, surprisingly good brake, really. Even the pads aren't as bad as I thought they'd be. If only I could find the missing bit, I might be able to even salvage this. One pair of wheels, with the brakes removed. Back one definitely needs a new brake plate. The front one, if I can get one, I will.